Okay, let's continue our discussion from previous session, and then we'll go back to that disk assessment. So we talked about the fact that we have two different costs. We have direct costs and indirect costs. And the direct costs are about material, labor, equipment. Then we have indirect costs, which is mostly about the overhead expenses like office expense, project management fees, permits, licenses, things that do not directly contribute to the project, but indirectly are included in construction costs. So some of these costs, like the material, labor, wages, equipment, these are easier to estimate because you have cost databases. You can look up the costs online. You can talk to the contractors, get quotes for their hourly or project-based fees. And similarly for equipment, you can get rental fees easily, like just by contacting the company. So these are easier to estimate. But the other side, you have productivity changes, complexities, and risks. These are the factors that are harder to estimate. So those things take more time and experience. So initially when you start, it's easier for you to get the left column numbers, but you need years of experience to get the right numbers when it comes to productivity, complexity, and risk assessment. In terms of productivity, and because this comes in our exercise, it refers to the number of units produced per day, per hour, like per time unit. So let's assume a crew must install 100 units, and that should be done over the course of the project. Normal productivity in this case, let's assume it is 10 units per day. So the crew installs 10 units per day. It will take 10 days for the crew to finish that project, which needs 100 units. If the productivity of this crew changes, so let's say instead of that 100% normal productivity, there is something that is impacting the productivity of the group, and it has like a 20% negative impact. There is a 20% productivity loss. So what it means is that instead of producing 10 units per day, you're now producing 8 units per day. The productivity has been impacted by a change in the number of units they are installing per day. But that doesn't directly impact the schedule. So the relationship between productivity and duration or the project, the schedule, is not a linear relationship. Because after you apply that 20% change in productivity, you recalculate how many days it will take. The number of days you will get is 12.5 or 12 days and a half day. And that tells you the relationship is not linear. It is an inverse kind of relationship. And that follows that formula. You do this multiple times for multiple productivity levels, and you get the days that it will take for the crew to install. You will get the formula that corresponds to the one that you see on the right side. It is time increase equals 1 divided by productivity. So if there is a 20% productivity loss, the schedule will expand by 25%. If your productivity loss is 25%, the time increase will be over 30%. So what you see is here is that schedules grow faster than crews slow down. And if you draw the curve, you will see that it kind of looks like a hyperbolic curve. It shows a nonlinear relationship, and there is diminishing returns, meaning initially the increase in productivity has a positive impact on the schedule. But over time, if productivity increases by a large amount, the schedule doesn't follow that linear trend. There is a small return by an increase in productivity. So at a standard point, we have 100% productivity corresponding to the baseline schedule. And according to that, you can go forward or backward to see what the impact of change in productivity on schedule is, which is a nonlinear relationship. overhead and profit, which we said we need to add to the direct cost. So we typically add 10% for gross overhead and 10% on top of that for profit. Again, these are gross numbers. In reality, these will change, but these are sort of industry standards, especially in residential construction. 10% overhead, 10% profit is known as the 10-10 rule in construction. And depending on the market over time, these numbers change. So for instance, in these graphs, you see the years from 2006 to 2020. So you see in 2008, where you had a recession, there was a loss in profit. The net profit margin was minus 3% because at that point, the home construction industry was dealing with a recession, and the contractors were losing money on their profit margins. So that's kind of how it works. When you hear about 30%, 25% profit margins from contractors or subcontractors, that refers to the gross number. It is not like the real final net profit margin as a percentage of the total revenue they have. The industry net profit margin is really around 3 to 6%, depending on the size of the company. If it's a very large size company like Wallbridge, for example, they do 3% to 5%. And then there is another line item, it's called the CM fee that you might see on some estimates. That refers to the compensation for the construction manager. In a small size projects, that comes with the overhead. So because it is already included in that overhead expenses and profit, you may not see that line on small project estimates, but in larger projects, you might see a line for the construction manager fee. And that is the extra services the construction manager does. And it is justified if it is not included in overhead or profit. It is not justified if it is included. Okay, estimating as a profession. So here I just wanted to go over some of the characteristics of estimating and estimators. And towards the end of the session, you will see how that DISC assessment can help you identify whether you gravitate towards an estimator role or gravitate toward a PM role. So estimators, what they do is that they collect a lot of data on materials, on costs, on equipment, productivity, risks, contingencies. And what I've learned over the last several years is that estimators tend to love numbers and mathematics. They really enjoy calculations. So if you're kind of that character that really like crunching numbers, you might be a good candidate for becoming an estimator after you graduate. And they're well compensated. They have a nice and sort of easy workplace. Most of the time they work in office. Sometimes they go to the field. So it really depends on your preferences and characteristics. But you have to be obsessed with mathematics, numbers, and collecting data. And over time, they specialize. So for instance, when you start as a construction manager, you're working with a small company, you might do all sorts of different projects. You might work as an estimator on all different sizes of projects. But when you go and work for a larger company, you will see that estimators are specialized. So for instance, as somebody who is having a construction management background, you won't be assigned to do estimating for mechanical, electrical systems. Those will be done with people who have a background in mechanical engineering or electrical engineering, and they work in large construction companies. They take on that part of the estimating. You, as a person who has a construction management background, you do like the major architectural systems or maybe civil engineering systems rather than mechanical, electrical, plumbing. But initially at a start, you might do those sort of things as well. Because when we're talking about small companies, the role of the estimator, project manager, owner are all the same. Just single person does all the work. When you're starting your own business, you do all sorts of calculations. But when you work for a larger company, you tend to specialize over time. Some of the duties of an estimator, like at the start of every project, you start to review plans and specifications carefully, and then you start with quantity takeoffs from construction drawings. Then you assign prices to those quantities, price of material, labor, equipment. You analyze risks and uncertainties. You add contingencies for those. And then you develop your cost estimate, hand it off to the project manager. Or if you are competing on a project, you develop a bid document, which may or may not correspond to the actual estimate. So in this case, let's say you really need to take on a job because your company needs to get more revenue, or you have workers or equipment that are waiting for more work. In those cases, the bid that you offer might be lower than the actual estimate that you have for the cost of the project. And then you also collaborate with other people on your team. And over the course of the project, you adjust your numbers to align with changes in the project. So again, in terms of the skills, you need to have analytical skills, math, writing, organization, knowledge of construction. You really need to know how things are produced and built. And you also need to have a knowledge of software. So again, mostly this work is done in office settings, but in terms of software, I've seen estimators in large companies are still using Excel to get the numbers done, but also Procore and Autodesk have their own dedicated estimating software that some kind of companies are using, but it's still Excel sort of prevails in many companies. And in terms of your deliverables as an estimator, you produce that estimate, but along with that, you hand off the quantity document. So your markups on the quantity takeoff document, that comes with the estimate. Your assumptions that you had. So we talked about the fact that the drawings may not show everything. Your drawings are like a description of how the project looks like, but they don't tell you how it's going to be built, what other factors might impact your project, like how the weather characteristics or access to the site or site conditions. Those are not in the drawing. So on top of your estimate, you produce a document that is called assumptions log. And that tells the owner or the project manager what are your assumptions that are not necessarily reflected on the drawing. And that is like a written format. You might have a basis of estimate. It's kind of like a user manual, because estimates in large projects tend to be like hundreds of lines. You might need an explanatory document to explain what the numbers are. And then you also produce a high-level estimate summary toward the end that summarizes the material, labor, equipment, overhead, profit, insurance, and other sort of major items that you hand off to the project manager. Now, in terms of AI, we are living in a period of time where things are changing very fast. Impact of technology on construction industry is really being scrutinized, and AI is now doing a lot of quantity takeoff. So in the past, estimators had to sit in an office, do like measuring walls for many, many hours. They had to be very patient about that, because every small mistake could mean a lot in terms of the financial impacts. But right now, AI is doing a lot of that work. So the role of the estimator is changing a little bit from somebody who spends a lot of time on quantity takeoff to someone who is now more focused on a strategy and taking on another side, like parts of the work, like working with data to make sure the cost data, equipment data are valid and accurate, or solving other complex challenges that might come with a project. So there is a relationship between the nature of estimators' work and the company side. When you're starting your business or working for a small company, again, estimator, project manager, owner might be the same person. One person does everything. But as your company size grows, estimator becomes a separate job. You have one person who does estimating, another person is the owner, another person is the construction manager. And in a large company, you might have several estimators. So one is doing only mechanical estimating, one is doing only electrical, the other is doing only civil kind of part of the job. And then in very large companies, you have an entire estimating department. So for instance, Wallbridge, which is the largest contractor in Michigan, they have a department in which they hire like over 30 estimators. Because let's say a company like Ford calls them and needs an estimate for a bid in like 2 weeks. And the size of those projects are really huge. So unless you have 20, 30% working at the same time, you cannot produce an accurate bid in 2 weeks for such large projects. There's also another role that comes in mid-size or larger size companies, and that is called the controller. If you hear that title, that refers to the person who compares the projected numbers or the estimates with the actual numbers on the job. So any kind of deviations from the original cost estimate, from the original schedule, or some other aspects of the work, those are handled by the controller. Because in mid-size and large companies, estimator is just really focused on the pre-construction side. They don't really deal with the project execution or deviations from the initial estimates. So in mid-size and large companies, you will hear the name of the controller, whose job is to compare the estimated numbers with what is going on the project, because there will always be deviations. And that person is responsible for capturing the real cost, the actual cost, comparing it with the baseline estimates, and control the deviations over time and inform all others on the team about what strategies they have to consider in order to meet the deadlines in the project. So for instance, if the project is getting late, they have to bring in more crew to get the work done so that the project doesn't have a significant delay. Finally, I wanted to show you this workflow of the estimator. It starts from pre-project planning. You review the bid invite if you are competing on a project, which was very common in the past, but right now most companies are doing design build, meaning they don't really compete. Like in the past, most of the public work was based on bidding because the governments, either local or federal government, they wanted to be more fair in terms of the cost of the project to the public. So they ran this bidding events. They were more of a competition among a number of companies, and they had to offer a bid to win a project. But right now, a lot of work is being done through design build, and there is like fewer bidding happening right now. But overall, you start with reading the documents, the bid documents, the invite, and then you coordinate with the stakeholders. You do some market research. Sometimes your market is not necessarily local. So for instance, I know companies here, they do work in other countries as well. So let's say you call Wallbridge and say, hey, I have a project in India, and they accept that if it is profitable. And they have to produce a bid in 2 weeks or so. So they have to do market research in India or Mexico or other countries to see what's going on over there. And that kind of informs their estimate. So if the project site is not local, you have to do market research to understand the cost of labor, material, equipment in other parts of the country or other countries as well. And then you start with conceptual estimating, site analysis, risk assessments, and then you do detailed quantity takeoff. So you have the construction drawings, you do detailed quantity takeoffs, and then you assign prices to that you got from your market research. Then you talk to contractors and subcontractors because you will have working relationships with contractors over time. When you are planning to offer a new project, you contact them and you say, hey, I have this project going on and I want to do the windows and doors. How much it's going to cost for me to do that if you are going to be my subcontractor on that project? So the estimator's role is really to send out invites to subcontractors to get numbers from them. And it's more of like a smaller bidding happening at that stage. You take quotes from different subcontractors that you have a working relationship with, and you take the most logical one. It could be the least expensive or the one that you trust most. So you solicit that bid at that point from the subcontractors. And then you collect everything, you prepare your bid documentation, you present it to the owner. And after the bid, if you win that, you might do some other negotiations as well. That can be also a part of the process. And then you organize for procurements, you hand off the estimate to the project manager. And at that point, most of the work is done for the estimator. Then it's the responsibility of the project manager and the controller to take on the costs and manage the project. And finally, once the project is over, the project manager and the controller report to the estimator. They give back the numbers as sort of a feedback so that the estimator knows what the actual costs were. So next time they start the same or a similar project, they have the real numbers or the most updated numbers. Okay, so as you can guess, at the start of an estimate, you have limited information about the project. When the project starts and things happen in real world, you will get more and more information. So initially, there is a large margin of error on an estimate, but over time, it becomes more clear what the actual costs are. And initially, you have a lot of flexibility to have an impact on the project. You can change things easily on the paper because you don't have anything physical built, and it's really easy to implement changes at that point. But over time, as the project is being built, it becomes much more expensive to change even like a small parts. So that's why the initial phases are very important. And typically, if you have a great vision for the project in the beginning, after the project is built, you will see the impact of that first great vision. Typically, if the first planning stage is done carefully, the project will end up being a successful project. If the planning stages are not done carefully, the project may not be as successful as expected. Okay, again, estimating is not exacting. It's more of a science and art combined. And you cannot be 100% accurate when you are offering an estimate. And that's why we have things like post estimates and debriefs so that we can inform the estimator for the next project about the actual costs and how much deviations we had. So second time you bid on a similar project, you avoid repeating the mistakes that you had in the first time. But again, in the second times, your deviations will be narrower, but that doesn't mean that your estimate will be, again, 100% accurate. It's called the feedback loop. So you get the final account for the future estimates. Okay, so for the coming sessions, we will discuss different estimate types. It will start from rough order of magnitude estimates, and then we will study conceptual estimates, semi-detailed, detailed, and engineer's estimates. And these are really dependent on how much information we have. As the documents become more complete, we will do more detailed estimates over time. But we'll go through these in the future. Okay, so this DISC survey. So let's see how many Ds we have. So the D letter that you see on the first column, that refers to the dominant character. And the I The I letter, that refers to influencer. The S letter is for the steady, and the C is for conscientious. So can you raise your hand if you are a dominant personality? How many dominants do we have? How many Ds? If your highest number is for column D, that means that your character is dominant. Only one, two. Yeah. Who got the highest number for I? Influencers. Okay. Four. Who got the highest number for S? Okay. That is a steady. And then who got the highest for C? Okay. If you got the highest number for C, you are a good candidate to become an estimator. So let's just start with interpreting what that is. So C for cautious or conscientious. They are analytical people. They have analytical thinking skills. They are interested in structure and logic. They're detailed oriented. That kind of personality aligns well with the requirements of an estimator's position. If you are a D character, that aligns very well with project manager job. So that means that you are a good candidate to become a project manager. If you are I, influencer, it means that you really like to work with people. Again, project manager is close, and that could be a good position for you. If you are S, I would say you are more aligned, you are more gravitating towards an estimator than a project manager. But again, it's kind of somewhere in the middle. I thought I would show this to you because when you are starting working for a company, they might do this. And the reason is that they want to make sure that the company is composed of people with diverse characters and skill sets. And I know that a lot of companies do this. So they want to have people from different mindsets, different skills, so they can complement each other.